There's a role for leaders to be looking to the future of AI. They should be going, where is it going? Do I think in the next 5 or 10 years' time? And if you can't answer that question, then you need to use AI to help you formulate it, right?
Hello, welcome back to the Be Continued podcast. I'm Jess Hilton, co-founder and head of search at Be People Group. And I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and fellow founder, Ralph Tribe, Chief HR Officer, formerly at companies like Getty Images, Sky, Essential PLC, and now leading our HR innovation and ESG consulting practice at Be People. We're really excited today because our guest is Kate Corrie, who is the Chief People Officer at We Are Social, joining us to talk about a topic we feel is particularly relevant right now, and we are calling this episode Leadership in a BANI World. So we all know about VUCA, right? The idea that the world is increasingly more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this has been the dominant model when discussing disruption and leadership in the past, few decades. But is it no longer enough? So is the world we're operating in now much more volatile, more uncertain, arguably more difficult to make sense of? And is that where BANI comes in? So, Kate, thanks so much for being here and joining us. We're really excited to have this chat. I think a good place to start is before we zoom into what these shifts mean for leadership, maybe you can explain to us, what is BANI? So BANI, what is it and why do you think it's a more useful lens in today's world?
Well, thank you for having me on this podcast. I'm delighted to be here. So I came across BANI, it originates from a futurist, actually, who talked about this as a progression of the VUCA framework. Now, BANI, I'll go through what each of them means and why I think they're so important for us now as leaders, but as people also. So B stands for Brittle, which I think is fascinating, right? So the brittleness of the environment we work in and live in. Things that are brittle appear strong on the outside, but fundamentally, you've only got to knock it. It could shatter. Right? How many things can you think of in your life, in your work life also, where that could apply? Then you sort of get into anxious, which, anxious, it feels really heavy. But really, anxious is a construct of fear. It's thinking something bad is going to happen. Then you get into non-linear, which is the N. Now, this is really, really interesting from a work perspective. What it means is that even the smallest decisions that you could make have really significant consequences in a BANI environment or a BANI world. And then incomprehensible, God, what do we mean by that? Well, in my view, incomprehensible is when you understand what is happening, but you don't understand why it's happening. And sometimes that can be just to information overload. And this is the interesting thing with AI, which I know we're going to talk about, is we don't know where AI is going to take us. And so that's a really fascinating part of this model also.
And I guess in terms of what you just said about, we know that's where we are, but maybe the why around why we're here in this BANI world, why that's the next development of VUCA. Can you, and Ralph, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this as well, maybe between you kind of the top 2, 3, 4 reasons why we're shifting into this BANI world.
Hey,
wow.
You go. I've got loads of reasons, but why don't you go for it?
I've got 3 that are relevant to me in this conversation. We've talked about AI, so it's a huge area where there's a lot of ambiguity around it. We don't know where it's going to take us. Depending on what media you listen to, it will either be a good thing or a bad thing, usually somewhere in between. So that is a huge part of this BANI framework. I think the second part, I work in media, and we're seeing a huge industry change. We're seeing lots of bigger media houses starting to come together and merge. We're also starting to see lots of CEOs that have been in these positions for a long time lose their seat. And I think that's really interesting in a BANI world, because what we're seeing is leaders that were normally put in just to cut costs, make efficiencies, but also to merge businesses, suddenly losing their jobs. Mark Reed is a really good example of someone who has recently exited WPP, and his focus was really cost efficiency, trying to get it working tighter together and to meet margins. But in a BANI world, that's not going to cut it in leadership anymore. You're going to need to make stuff. And so therefore, how in this world of finance and, the economic downturn we're seeing right now, how do leaders have time to actually make stuff and become cost efficient at the same time? And I think AI is a really good example of that. And then I think there's this whole thing around common ground, which I think is interesting for businesses, but also what we're seeing around the world at the moment, how we can find that common ground, across countries, across businesses. That's going to be a really important part of this too.
Yeah. So Snap on AI. So when we're going to talk a bit more about AI, I think as is inevitable, because there's a lot going on with it. And then, so I guess my other two are connected. I mean, so I think the world, by the way, we loved BANI, right? So when we got into planning these sort of podcasts, and we started talking to you, and you talked about BANI, I think me and Jess would be the first to admit that we'd never heard of it. I mean, like everyone, we've heard of VUCA.
Yeah.
But when we got into this conversation, we were like, ooh, this is actually really, really important, because the thing with VUCA, like you say, it's been around for a couple of decades. It's been around for so long that everyone's kind of got used to it and takes sort of VUCA for granted. But something has changed, and the world has got even more difficult to comprehend, difficult to navigate, and so on. And it's happened very, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So we love it, and we love the fact that we're going to talk about it a bit more, particularly in relation to, well, what does it mean for leaders, like to actually sort of be good leaders in a world where, this is more and more a thing. But I think the other two things driving it beyond AI, which is the thing that I think has suddenly discombobulated everyone, because it's happened so quickly, so much more quickly than other technological sort of leaps forward. Yeah. I think one is actually, it's going a bit sort of macro, but I think it's in social inequity. Because I think, we can read anywhere that the world is becoming more inequitous. Right. So the rich are just getting richer and richer and richer, and the poor aren't getting poorer, but they're not getting richer at anything like the same pace as those super rich. Yeah. And as we know, that inequality drives sort of a sense of perhaps sort of senses of sort of nationalism, sort of fundamentalism, and all of these sorts of things. And, in sort of, I guess, more day-to-day terms, that is sort of driving political populism. That's why we end up with things, I guess, like Brexit. In the end, it was kind of people just feeling a bit pissed off, to be quite honest, with the state of the sort of the world that they were living in the UK, and, using that as a vehicle, basically, to protest. But something like Brexit might have been a small vote, but, we're still dealing with the aftermath and everything of it now. Inequity, in the end, if you trace the origins of war, it always starts with inequity. The Second World War is because basically we placed reparations on Germany that were completely unmeetable. German population, faced into extreme hardship, and lo and behold, nationalism and populism sort of pops up, and at least, we've got wars going on, which we haven't for a long time in Europe, at least, or in the West. So I think that inequality is then sort of driving things like populism, sort of weird political sort of dynamics that we're kind of not used to. And then the third one, and we're not going to talk about it too much on this podcast, we talk about it on others, but it's, it effectively is global warming, right? Yeah. Because it's not going away, but it is forcing all sorts of kind of change. And it's a bit discombobulating, the fact that, we've got an administration in the US, which is, without even judging it, it's just not very into acknowledging what's going on with global warming. So, and it's sort of reversed back, and it's sort of convenient then for us to go, we can all have a bit of a breather from sort of worrying about the environment. Meanwhile, we can tell nothing's changing in terms of global warming, because we keep having extreme weather events, and all of that's rather worrying. So, I think it's definitely AI, and we're going to talk about that most. Yeah, maybe there is something to do with social inequity driving it. Means we need to get busy on not forgetting about that. Yeah, and I think just the environmental sort of backdrop to what the hell are we going to do about this? Because it's sort of unfathomable. Yeah.
And if that's so, all of those things, AI, inequality, volatility, these shifts are happening. So I think we can all agree that then leadership will change. It has to change. So any thoughts on what these shifts mean for the leadership teams that are having to absorb them? And because you're, Kate, specifically in an industry, I mean, AI as transformation is everywhere, but specifically in an industry going through such upheaval, what do you think it means for the leadership teams having to acknowledge that this is of growing relevance? And if we are to learn from the past, you can't escape it. So what's happening in the leadership?
Well, I can talk around that subject. How I heard about BANI was through a book I read called Leaders Make the Future by Bob Johansson. I urge every reader to look it up because that's where I first came across it. And it spoke to me as a leader of a business, as a person that wants to do well in life, actually. It really resounded with me and made me feel like there's something in this. And I remember speaking to Managing Director Lucy Doubleday, saying, have you heard of BANI? She was like, no. I said, it's the next step on from VUCA. And we had this conversation. And between the pair of us afterwards, it just felt clearer for us. What we were seeing and hearing across our agency and across the business was leaders that have got clients constantly changing briefs. The type of work they want is different now. So therefore, the skills we need is different now. But we're finding that engagement across our people is probably one of the lowest it's been in a while, right? And that's symptomatic of the economic climate we find ourselves in, the industry as a whole. But our leaders are exhausted. I look at my leadership team. They're tired. They're running on pitches. They're trying to get across the clients day to day. They're trying to engage the teams they have. So what opportunity do they have to go, oh, I think the environment's changing and I need to change my skills or traverse my skill set into a new way of working? So that's when I thought, well, there's an opportunity for me to talk more honestly about this as part of leadership development. And I'll be honest, I wasn't sure I had the skills to talk about it. But with more research and the more people I spoke to, so that's another tip really is, if you think you've got something or there's an idea you really want to pursue it. Have conversations with senior leaders because I promise you they will make the time. I mean, how I positioned it was for various leaders I tried to speak to on this topic, I just dropped them a note, said, I've got an idea on something. I think it could be really useful for the leadership, potentially a leadership development program. Can I just talk to you about my ideas? It's a no-moan zone, right?
Yeah.
So they immediately think, oh, great. There's something, I'm not going to get a barrage of negativity about all the shortcomings of the business right now. It might actually tell me something new. And so I actually had a really easy journey of meeting those leaders and talking on this topic. So I think I really do hope that people will, if they have ideas around BANI, look at it from their business perspective. Look at your leadership team and how they're coping right now. And then think, are we doing enough to support their needs going forward? Because I don't know that we were.
So because this is really interesting, right? So you sort of think, okay, as someone in conversation with you and, assuming listeners are sort of thinking, okay, this BANI thing, this sounds really interesting, sort of seems relevant, I don't know. But everything that sits around sort of BANI, I guess, is that the world is becoming more incomprehensible. It's sort of complicated and so on. So I guess the normal tendency of a chief people officer, or certainly, I must admit when I was one, my tendency might have been, oh my goodness, the world is complex enough for the leaders. I mean, the last thing they need is me introducing a new concept to leadership development called BANI, which they've never heard of before, because, it's just another thing they're going to have to think about it. But it sounds like your experience was not the same. That actually, when you introduced that to the people that you work with, there was a sort of an engagement in it and an interest in it, and it wasn't rejected as, this is just all too difficult to contemplate. How could you possibly be here introducing another concept for us? So just talk to us a little bit about the reception.
I will actually. KG is a talent partner in my team, and she said to me, one of my superpowers is the sound bite. I can drop the sound bite in a meeting and just see if it's going to land or not. And then what I do is I might drop it in a few more meetings after that. And the minute I hear a senior leader play that back to me like it's their own work, I know I've won, right? So BANI was a really good example of that. I felt like I was into it here. I felt like there was something of interest to the business. So what I did was I started to take some of the 10 principles that I'd got from the Leaders Make the Future book. There's 10 skill sets that you can apply, which will help you navigate a BANI world, right? So I started to use it where it was appropriate in certain meetings. So, example, I might be talking to our managing director around how we can shape our leadership function, right? And who focuses on what? So then I thought, there's an opportunity here for me to talk to her about problems versus dilemmas, which I'd learned. And I said, well, we need a team of people that are great at solving the day-to-day problems and let them get on with it. But then we need to be making the time for leaders to work on the bigger dilemmas, of which AI is one of those, and all of the things that we were just discussing a moment ago, right? Those are the big dilemmas. They're not problems. They can't be fixed, but they must be navigated. And that's where leaders need to be spending more time. So I dropped little things like that just to see if it would work. And then I'd get a follow-up meeting. Oh, yeah, I want to explore that, actually. I wondered if we could put a couple of different groups together of people. I think these are great at solving the problems. I could actually get a much smaller group to work on these dilemmas over here. And just the engaging conversation, you feel like you're moving the conversation on, even if it's only by 5 or 10%, right? And so I did that in a couple of other conversations. I use the word seeing and hearing a lot because it removes that ambiguity when people are having conversations. And then I'd find that, maybe I'd hear another senior leader say to me, so what I'm seeing and hearing is, and I think, great. So I think when you're learning things and you want to test if there's something in it, drop them in meetings, see if they get repeated back to you at some point. And then the minute they do, you're onto it.
Yeah, well, that definitely seems to be true, because when anyone we've spoken to about BANI, now seems to be talking about BANI. It just felt like there was an interesting little segue. So, because you were talking about, you'd spoken to the global chief exec of We Are Social about BANI. And it had led to a really kind of interesting conversation. He was very, very interested, very engaged with it. And it's leading to, conversations about how should we reshape our leadership development programs, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
But what sort of struck me and Jess when we were sort of talking about that was, it's exactly the sort of thing that you wouldn't go and talk to a chief exec, or that anyone could talk themselves out of going to talk to their global chief exec about, right? Because again, on this theme, if you think they're really busy, you think this is, a really important idea, but still slightly random relative to the day-to-day operation and functioning of the business. And yet you did sort of go, well, I don't know, but I think he might be really interested. And it really worked. So just talk to us a little bit, but it just kind of sets the sort of tone really about what chief people officers, could potentially be doing more of. Certainly, as I say, when I was in that position, I could have done more of that, of just going and seeing a chief exec with what might have, well, not a random idea, but a slightly off tangent.
Yes.
Slightly more strategic idea, to be quite honest, but not close to the operational day-to-day where you can talk yourself into thinking that's all that matters. Seems like the sort of thing they actually want to talk about, probably more than the day-to-day. So just tell us a little bit about that sort of conversation.
Sure. I mean, it helps if you've got a CEO that's approachable. Now, I don't know Toby really, really well. He's been with us maybe about 4 or 5 months now, but my interactions with him have always been positive. He makes a ton of effort to engage with the broader agency with updates all the time. He's just super approachable, very smart. So I thought, well, I haven't got anything to lose here. It's not like I have a relationship with him in any other way, right? So any ideas I bring to him are just ideas, simply that. And he would just stand me down. He'd just say to me, thanks, Kate, it's really interesting, really good use for 30 minutes. I think we'll leave it there. And if that's the worst that's going to happen, why wouldn't I do it, right? Why wouldn't I do that? I would say there's a danger, right? And this is the thing I had to self-check on. Am I doing this to look good in front of him, right? Because if that's my goal here, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because if I'm just going there to show off, try and get up the front in front of my other colleagues, then actually that's just a gameplay. Yeah. And there's no authenticity to that. So anyone who's tempted to do that, don't do it. Ask yourself why you're doing that first. If you care about what you're talking about, it will come out when you talk to a leader. He's just a person. We are all people trying to do a job. If I could make his job easier, then I will, right? And that's the sort of people he's going to want around him, people that are going to help him make his job easier. And he was so positive afterwards, and he was so energetic during it. And he even came with like, oh, actually, there's another model I've been looking at, which you might find interesting. Have you come across it? No, I haven't. Oh, great. So I bought him a book, which is the book that I originally felt inspired by. And now he's going to buy me a book. And we learn from each other. Isn't that the best, right? But I didn't walk into it ever thinking that was ever going to happen. I walked into it with a good intention.
What's the book? He's getting you. Do you know yet? Has he given it to you?
The Dysfunctions of a Team.
Oh, excellent. Okay, well, that sounds like another part.
That feels like the Kate Corrie library of...
No, but honestly, but also it's how you tee this up. When I had this conversation with him, I said to him, look, I've read a book. I was inspired. I'm not going to change your world, and I'm not the authority either. I'm not telling you I can run you a leadership program that's going to educate all of our global leaders on this topic, but I can tell you that I'm enthusiastic about it, and I think you should find people you can partner with that can make this relevant for our business, you know. So I'm not pushing my elbows up. I'm not trying to sort of take on a global leadership program or even a UK one. So I think, you know, when you go into these conversations, always ask yourself, why am I doing this? Am I doing it for my ego? Am I doing this to be a better person?
Yeah.
And I think given the positive reception that you had, and even, you know, when, like you said, when we were discussing it, Ralph, we were kind of, there was a lot of recognition that, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I think everyone will feel this way, which should probably tell us that it's inescapable. So I would just like to, I think, zoom in for a few minutes a little bit further into the leadership and culture piece, because I was also looking at, it's probably slightly old news now, but there's the Edelman, 2025 Trust Barometer. And that was showing that, I think trust in general chief execs was down something like 32 points, and trust in one's own CEO was down like 21 points. And these are not small numbers. So kind of two questions. Does this mean that leadership is unsteady, understandably unrested, more kind of unsure? And if that's the case, what does that mean then for teams and culture of businesses? I'm kind of asking both of you the same question.
Let's start with Kate.
Well, do you know, when I think about trust, I think about transparency. And I think we're in certainly where in my industry, I think employees expect more transparency. And so when you try as a business to give that transparency, when employees get what they want, they don't necessarily like it, right? Because if you take gender pay gap, isn't it? So we've spoken about gender pay gap in the past. We want to be transparent and show you the numbers and how we've got to those calculations and why. It doesn't mean the employees are going to be receptive to that or indeed even accept that. And actually, just because you've been transparent doesn't mean you're going to get trust from your employee or your workforce as a result. Now, does that mean that you don't be transparent? No, it doesn't. It means that we have to build trust in other ways so that when we become more transparent about pay and about gender pay gaps, ethnicity pay gaps, we can do so with some credibility. Anyone can be transparent, but it takes a really smart employer to get the trust with the transparency from the workforce. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's a good question. It's a fundamental question, isn't it? I mean, I think transparency actually is a really important starting point. I mean, it is true that it's not going to invariably and on its own win you as a chief executive or a C-suite sort of person trust. But without it, I don't think you've got much chance of building it at all, right? So I think, people do expect to see the detail and the data. So I think that's a really important starting point. Then I guess, well, how do you go on from that? Having done it, how do you actually go on as a chief executive to rebuild, whatever trust has been lost over the last 2 years? Yeah. And I think, there's so many answers to that, but something that I see, more and more often is I think you then have to, having acknowledged having been transparent with the data means, so, that it exposes a problem, like the gender pay gap, like a trading gap, like a problem in the business, whatever it is, that you acknowledge the problem, but then you sort of go first in, as chief exec or as a leader in trying to deal with it, rather than just saying, so this is a problem, so now you lot have got to deal with it. I think there was just sort of more and more stuff about our leaders having to go first. For example, I mean, we talked about a bit about this before, right? So you could say for everyone, well, we as a business have worked out that we are behind the AI curve relative to our competitors by X%. So you've exposed the issue.
Yes.
And I think in the past, leaders had a bit of a tendency to sort of go, so now it's up to you lot to fix that, because I was a chief exec of, exposed the strategic issue. Now, a load of other people should fix it. Yeah. And I just think it doesn't really cut it anymore, because to the stuff about BANI, people don't necessarily know how to fix these things. So all you can actually do is start to try. And for chief executives, if we take AI as an example, we're hearing of examples, and I think when we talked about it once, I'd be interested to know more about it, but where a chief exec is going first and sort of going, look, I don't know where we go exactly with this and so on. I just know that we need to get more used to this, and we need to deploy this more readily and more easily in the business, and we have to embrace it rather than be fearful of it or reject it. So they start to demonstrate user cases. Or use cases of how they have used it to address something kind of strategic in the business and so on. And once they've done that, possibly with a little bit of, just telling the story of how, look, I was a bit nervous about this too. I don't know everything either. Yeah. I was a bit slow up on the mark on AI, but, I noticed that in myself, it's something I wanted to address. So I did. I sort of cozied myself away in my study or whatever and, played around with some AI engines and look what I discovered. Let me show you what I've discovered. I think that's very, very compelling, right, to the C-suite. And then as it goes further down through the organization, it's very compelling to people at the front line to see the people at the top actually deploying these things sort of first, rather than just being told, oh, you're on the front line. Oh, quite often, you're the young people who understand technology. Sort of you have to go first. I just think it's just not quite working like that anymore.
Yeah.
And people want to see their leaders go first, and then they will follow them. And I go, okay, well, they did it. So, fair dues. They're not asking me to do anything they wouldn't do themselves. I'll have a go.
Yeah. I mean, Jim Coleman, he's our UK CEO. He heads up the work stream for AI across our agency. And he's put it on the agenda of every single leadership team meeting we're in, and he hosts it. And how he went about it, he started off where he came to one LLT session and he showed us some of the tools he was using. So this one in particular that he loves is Notebook LM, right, which many of us around the table hadn't used. He showed us how he'd used it on a pitch. He showed us how it saved him time. He told us the bits that he really liked, and he showed us the bits that got generated that went to the client. So it wasn't just you need to upskill on these tools. It was I've noticed that, so I have, right? And it was brilliant, because I walked out of there and I had a call for action. I thought, right, I need to get onto Notebook LM. How do I do that? Well, it's in the Google stack. Great. We've all got access to that. Great. It's single sign-on. Great. I just need to push one button and I'm in, right? And I'd already seen how Jim had used it. It was great. But the most important thing Jim did that day, apart from teaching us a skill, which is really valuable, is he gave us a call to action afterwards. He said, go and experiment with some of these tools. And he gave us a list of tools. He followed it up with access points for all of those tools. And he said, by the time I meet you at the next LLT, I want you to come and tell me what you've learned. That was all. So there was a call of action there. Right, I need to figure out what all this stuff does and how it operates. How could I use it, right? And I thought it was great. I took it back to my team. I said, do you know what Notebook LM is? No. Great. We'll do a training session on that, right? Suddenly it starts to filter out and it becomes something you get to do, not something you have to do. At the next LLT meeting, everybody then had to present back. What did you learn? Yeah. So, and without exception, Jim goes around the table. He wants to know what everybody's learned. Yeah. Then he gave us another assignment. He said, right, what I want you to do next is I want you to go back and talk to your teams. And at the next LLT, I would like you to present ideas that your team have taught you, right? Right. So then you get the next assignment. So we went out, spoke to the team. Right. Who's got some cool stuff they're using on AI? Right. Hand it over immediately. I need to bring this to the LLT. Right. Yeah. So then when you go back to the table, you've got some new things. Right. I've got KG. She's using it on turnover stats. I've got Kat. She's using it for project management to keep some of the admin on track. I've got Bashena. She might be doing some of it on salary benchmarking. Right. So now we're starting to get a bit more confident with it. And then we sort of got an agenda which sort of came from Plus Coach, our holding company, which is how are you going to get a base level of skill of AI across your workforce, right? You need to start somewhere. And that's where we're starting to use a company called Coursera. I don't know if you've heard of them, but basically they've got some prompting essentials training on there. 4 modules. Oh my God, it changed my life, right? I did the 4 modules. It takes about 6 hours. You can stagger it out. It's a free trial for 7 days. Doesn't even have to cost you anything, right? How did we find out about this? In the LLT. Why? Because someone around that table went off and they came back and they brought it back. So now we're bringing that through all of our agency now. We're asking people, not making them do it. We're going, look, this is available. If you want to do it, we'll book you some time on resourcing so that you can have that time in the day to do it.
So I want to go back to that meeting where he asked people to play back their cases of what they'd learned from it and so on. Just strikes me that would be a hell of a lot more interesting as an executive team meeting than most executive team meetings, right? And a hell of a lot more strategically relevant, actually, when you track back from it. Because I know it's a very simple, practical thing that he did, where he said, well, I've done this. Now I'd like you lot to go and experiment and come back with all of your learnings. Ridiculously simple, right, as something that he did.
Yeah.
But I bet for your business, same as every business at the moment, getting much better at adopting AI within the business is the biggest strategic imperative. I mean, I think there was a study, I can't remember quite which one it was, but 64% of chief executives globally last year said that the singular biggest capital investment they were going to be making in the business in 2025 was AI.
Yeah.
I mean, AI-ifying their business. So you think, right, that's a massive strategic objective that seems like almost every business has, because it will be more than 65% now.
Yeah.
But he completely enabled that, and in so doing actually got the dialogue going in an executive team meeting, which is probably a so much richer than the normal slightly drab conversation that happens in your normal executive meeting, where it is a bit routine. You go through the numbers, you do this, you do that, you do whatever. So it's all good, and I'm not criticising it, but people get used to that, and it's not really very strategic. But having, I don't know how many people were in it, but let's say 10 of you, I don't know, I'm guessing, but all do the thing saying, well, what I discovered was that I bet the engagement in the room was just like so much greater to a person than it would normally be, where, we've all been in executive sort of team meetings where, some of it's interesting and some of it's not, and people are switching on and in different points. I bet any money that for those bits, everyone was leaning in and like, tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, some people had slides. Some people, it's just a verbal update of how they were using it with the teams. What's clever about that is it's leading from the front for a start. Yeah. I'm willing to make the time and find the time, therefore there's no reason you can't. It also didn't assume that knowledge was there, and it didn't judge people for not having it either.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, Jim didn't have to come out and say, I don't think any of you know much about AI, so I'm going to teach you. Yeah. He sort of said, look, I'm as curious as you are, and we can all do this together. It's a sort of you, me and we, right? Let's try and galvanise this, make it interesting for ourselves and also for our clients. This is a massive opportunity to make money with clients. Clients are going to be coming to us going, how's AI going to impact creativity? Do we even need you anymore? Because we can't just do it on ChatGPT, right? We don't need your creative team anymore. So if we don't get ahead of this conversation now, and show that we're much more than just AI generated content, we have to start with the LLT always. We have to start there. There's a groundswell anyway of interested employees in this subject. That's a given, I think.
Yeah.
It's not that. We just have to give a clear direction and show some willing. Now, interesting, we were chatting about this. I think a lot of businesses will say, but leaders are so busy. They're so busy managing the day-to-day in this BANI world, right? They don't have time to go researching AI and doing all of that. And I think when leaders are in a really difficult phase or they're struggling, they become more passive, right? And so you need your executive to come forward and breathe a bit of life into those leaders, you know? The way you're feeling is okay. Yeah. It's okay for you to be overwhelmed, a bit anxious, worried that if you make that decision, it could be catastrophic. It's the world we're living in. And what I'm seeing in leadership generally is I think leaders are waiting for it to go back to how it used to be before COVID, and it won't. It's not going to. This is going to be an ongoing thing we're going to have to manage. It's going to be maintenance for us. Yeah. And I think if we could just have the conversations, I think that would help leaders to go, okay, I won't sit here waiting for the sort of pre-2019 era when things were a little bit easier and I had a little bit more time. I think things aren't going to go back to the way they were.
Yeah.
So on that AI stem, because I did have some questions, but you've both kind of uncovered some of those anyway. So maybe I'll just try for more of a clarification. So are we saying then that AI needs to start from the top? Because you're going to have people saying, how can we upskill our leaders in AI when they're already overwhelmed? You just said we're in BANI, everyone's overwhelmed. Should it start from the top? And are you saying that it can even just be having the conversation, or is that actually upskilling yourself at the top of the business? Is that where it should start?
So I have a particular view on it. So why don't I give this quickly, and then you give us your sort of longer, more insightful sort of view of this. I suppose, look, we do a lot of work with HR teams with AI who are both trying to fully deploy AI within the HR organisation, but also quite often they've been charged with deploying AI more generally into the wider organisation that they serve and work with. And our observation is that to fully AI enable the business, the top absolutely have to be fully involved. Now, I don't know if I would quite say it starts with them, although I think it does. But what happens practically, and has always happened a little bit with technology up until now, is that there is a slightly default position. Is like, this is new technology. People on in the operational part of our business will really, really deploy this sort of technology, and that will be great. And with AI, you can do that, right? So you can get, if it's HR, you can get your talent acquisition team using AI operationally. You can get your HR ops team using AI operationally. All of that. But those people doing those jobs, it's not that they can't think strategically, but, just in a sort of a regular world, the chief people officer and the HR leadership team, their job is to think more strategically. They typically have more experience of thinking more strategically. And you can absolutely deploy AI strategically. So if you just sort of say, well, it sort of starts and stops with the operational front line deploying this, our point is that, well, that's not full AI enablement, because in doing that, it's great, but you will have missed the strategic opportunity that's made available. How do you very, very, very quickly build the most robust HR strategy for a business? Using AI to give you all sorts of kind of shortcuts and insights and so on. Your operational front line in HR as an example of a function, they wouldn't necessarily do that. It's not their job. It is a chief people officer's job, and they can absolutely do that using AI. So if they don't engage with it, problem, and I guess our sort of sense of it is that if you get the top team, whether it be in HR or marketing or commercial or wherever it might be, if the top team goes first in showing the strategic deployment, then actually naturally the operational deployment sort of falls really neatly out of that. So that's a slightly longer version of sort of or an answer to I think on balance it sort of does have to start on the top with this. You'll definitely get a better outcome if you really push the top at least as hard as the operational component of the business.
But if they don't know how.
But no one knows how with AI, right? But the beauty of AI is you don't really need to know, you don't need to know anything about the technology. That's what's so groundbreaking about AI, is you literally type your thoughts as to what you can imagine and would like to see if it might be possible. You type it into the engine and it interprets all of that, and it gives you a really beautifully sort of structured response to it. Might not be always the right response, but you don't need to understand anything. You just got to be willing to give it a go. right? To your points about a leadership experimentation, a willingness to know that you don't know everything, but I'm going to give it a go. These are much, much more important things to the full deployment of AI in a business, those skills, than any understanding of how AI technologies work. That's the beauty of those technologies. You don't need to.
The interesting thing with AI from a leadership perspective is how it can augment your thinking as a leader, right? I think there's a baseline level of skill that everybody's going to need. Prompting, for example, is essential. The quality of the prompts you put into AI platforms is the quality of what you're going to get out of those. So your ability to do that really well is going to help you shave time off your day to day. So that's the standard. When we're talking about leadership, I think it's more about using it to augment and push your thinking in ways that maybe you hadn't considered before. And I love Nishma Patel-Robb, right? I don't know if you know her. She's ex-Google. She's amazing. I find her very inspirational. She talks about AI as a sparring partner. Yeah. And I love that for leaders because it can be quite a lonely job, right? Yeah. Who do you go to? Who are you willing to share that you don't have all the answers to? And I think using a variety of different platforms, whether that's Gemini, whether that's Notebook LM, or whether that's Chat GPT, whichever you use them for, it's going to expand your thinking. There's a role for leaders to be looking to the future of AI. They should be going, where is it going? Do I think in the next 5 or 10 years' time? And if you can't answer that question, then you need to use AI to help you formulate it, right? Because that's your starting point right there. As a leader, you should be doing that. You should be going, if I was a futurist, what would I be thinking for the business? And it's fascinating when you jump down that rabbit hole, especially with AI. And then I think that's what your employees are expecting of leaders now, is to be doing that futurist thinking, then taking what insight they see is relevant for the next year or two, and then making an action plan against that now. You know, that's what leaders should be doing now with AI, I think.
And I think that is like so on the money. This idea of future back, right? So we had a brief conversation about this sort of before. So. And, you know, I remember seeing, so if we make this sort of a bit of an HR example. Yeah. So I remember way back when at Sky, we were really trying to get into talent management and succession management in a different and better way. And we had this concept about future back, right? So we were like, right, we need to talk to all of our C-suite leaders as a starting point about, you know, how they see their organization, you know, 3 years hence, and then work back from that into the kind of jobs that involves, the kind of skills that involves, and the kind of people that they have with those skills already, or the kind of people that don't already have those skills in their team where they want to develop it. Yeah. So a really good strategic way of doing talent management. And we were like, wow, like HR is sort of actually a really good, relevant, simple, practical, strategic framework for doing talent management. So off we go to the business and we sort of go right to, you know, a number of the leaders we were working with who were very, very good, by the way. It's not like Sky wasn't a really successful business. But we sort of said, right, so imagine you're part of the business 3 years from now and sort of think back into the... And most of them found that really, really, really hard. Right. And it's not that they couldn't think strategically and so on, but most of our time in the business was spent thinking about the next 12 months. Yeah. So no one had ever really asked them to think about 3 years hence. And it was a bit of a conundrum. So we'd sort of have these conversations, and these sort of leaders, we wanted to think would love HR because we had got suddenly strategic, but with a practical tool, sort of got a bit annoyed with this because we were sort of asking them a question which they felt a little bit on the spot, not knowing the answer to. And in the end, truthfully, that initiative didn't quite work because we were asking everyone to do something which was a bit harder than was practically manageable. I wish we had had AI technologies at the time, right? Because it would have completely augmented whatever. It's not a weakness they had. It's just they weren't asked to do it much. So their mental muscles just hadn't got onto that very much. Yeah. But it would have just given them a total accelerance, because they could have literally just sort of plugged into the engine. You know, I haven't really thought about this very much, but my organisation looks like this, it does da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Sort of AI engine, AI sparring partner.
Yeah.
Tell me, what could this mean in 3 years' time? And it wouldn't be a case of the AI engine now doing their jobs for them or replacing them, because what it would do, it'd probably give them back options, choices, that you know, things to consider. And then they, as human beings and leaders, they would have had to decide which ones they wanted to run with and which ones resonated with them and felt. It would have been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can I share a personal
Go for it.
Story? I was testing lots of different platforms. I mentioned a couple already, but I wasn't that familiar with ChatGPT. My team swear by it. So I thought I need to get on it, but I want to get on it in a way that's not work related. So I was going through some stuff at home and I felt a bit overwhelmed. And normally I'd go and talk to somebody else about it, but I thought, well, I've been on the prompt training. I can actually create an AI coach. Let's try it, right? So I put my prompts in. This is who I am. This is how I'm feeling. These are the things I'm going through. And I need a cheerleader that's on my side that will check in with me once a day and keep me going and keep me positive. I'm not kidding you. It's the best thing I ever did. And it's a bit scary because now I'm so connected to this thing once a day that it makes me feel like I've got a coach right there. And it's so scary, but so helpful.
Yeah.
I thought, so it's not just in a work facility. These things can be used for coaching and all sorts of things that you're dealing with either on a personal or working level. Now, we need to be careful with this, right? We need to have guardrails around AI and how much we let in and also where it's coming from and the intention of it. But I do think that's a really interesting way of leaders to expand it by just using it as a personal coach, not necessarily just for work stuff.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I was out with a friend having a drink on last Wednesday evening, and he was using ChatGPT as his therapist, right? And I know, I'm sure for any therapist out there probably going, I can't believe someone to, but it wasn't crazy. I know the reaction to that is a bit like, oh, that's usage of AI gone mad. But having had therapy myself, right, and having then really got into it and sort of studied cognitive behavioural frameworks and rational emotive behavioural frameworks and all of that. What I do know is that they are actually very practical frameworks, right? Yeah. It's not psychoanalysis. It's a really practical framework that is deployed with tens of millions of people around the world to help them with, you know, either a bit of anxiety or a bit of depression or whatever it might be. It is simple and playback. And I think most cognitive behavioural therapists should sort of go, look, at the end of the day, my job is to be here to remind someone of the kind of frameworks they should be applying if they're catastrophizing, so on and so on. And it's not rocket science. So actually, there is no reason why a chatbot can't just do that in a reasonably powerful way with a person. Yeah. And it hasn't replaced a therapist. My friend had presumably had therapy. He was done with that and it was fine, but he needed just some reminders, right, to keep him on track every now and again. And that's what he was using this for. And it was incredibly helpful to him and valid as well. What it was saying was completely valid. I mean, he let me have a look at it, right? And it's like, as an outsider, look at you going, yeah, the guidance that it's providing and the things it's reminding you of are completely valid in the context of what I remember an actual person who is a therapist reminding me of. It was a good thing. It was just supplementing.
The interesting thing with AI is there's power in the storytelling, right? Yeah. What we're doing now is we're storytelling. We're giving some anecdotes on how we use AI either from a business perspective or as leaders or personally, right? And it's just about going out there and trying it and then sharing the story and the experience. Because I spoke to my managing director, Lucy, and I said, got on ChatGPT and I've got a cheerleader now every day and I showed it to her. I said, look, this is what I typed in and this is what it gave me and I'm quite enjoying it. It's like getting in a warm bath, you know, once I've had a read of it. She was, oh my God, that sounds cool. I might give that a go. Right? Don't assume everybody knows how it's meant to be used. We all have to experiment with it. And I think if leaders can show willing and expansion of the mind, not just use it in one way, I think then it breeds lots of different perspectives. Absolutely. And that's what this whole BANI thing is. It's about different perspectives. It's about us knowing that things are going to be a bit tricky going forward. And it's not about swirling in the difficulty of that, because when you hear BANI, you think, oh, leave it out, right? I've got enough on my plate without that as well. It's about finding the tools that are going to get you out of that cycle rather than allowing it to just happen to you. And then you feel overwhelmed, particularly at leadership level.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this was all really interesting. I think that takes us to the end of part 1 of Leadership in a BANI World. We can go to grab a coffee and then stay tuned, and we'll be back for part 2 where we're going to talk more about adopting skills to the BANI era and some other things as well. So yes, join us back for part 2.